just doing, a guest appearance for a few songs. So who knows? When you dug up that quote from Sam, that tour was never going to be with Sam.
Well, the weird thing is that let's look at this, for example. Okay, number one, Gary never talked about this. Okay, number two, Dave never talked about this. Number three, Ed never talked about it. Wolf talked about it as an idea he discussed with his dad. I totally believe that. The problem here is Sammy stepped in and was trying to almost like backtrack and like, oh yeah, that was all going to happen. Whoa, no. Wait a minute. That plan was in place, but that wasn't the kitchen sink tour that Wolf was talking about with Ed. Sammy was not involved in that. We proved that. We even said, I'll get him a ticket. I'll get him backstage. That was all there in the last podcast. But one thing I did want to add to Galen, I have a quick kitchen sink idea set list. So I'm going to read to you real quick. For David Lee Roth era, You Really Got Me, Jump, Panama, Running with the Devil, Ain't Talking About Love, Dance the Night Away, Everybody Wants Them, Unchained, Hot for Teacher. The Sammy side, Right Now, Humans Being, Why Can't This Be Love, Best of Both Worlds, When It's Love, Finish What You Started, Pound Cake, Top of the World, Can't Stop Loving You. And then Gary, Without You, and What I Want, with Ed and Al soloing. What do you think, Dave?
Interesting. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I have to say about your what if.
Okay. Letter number 19 is coming from Peter Geyerson. And Peter, I'm telling you right now, I cut the living shit out of your letter. So, because Dave is going crazy with the length of your letter. So I want you to let you know I had to do that. So, number one. He says, I had a thought about your occasional repeated comments that Hagar had an active dislike of covering Roth songs while Hagar, was in the band. I think that your comments are completely justified, but I don't think that the criticism can stop with Hagar. Surely the same accusation must be able to be put upon Roth when he returned to the band, inasmuch as Hagar only ever performed a small amount of Roth songs. He did at least perform some of them, albeit not with much enthusiasm when it came to Jump initially. However, Roth performed none of Hagar's songs, which also means that only Cherone truly fit the bill as a replacement singer, as he alone was the only one of the three of them who had the wherewithal to dive headfirst into the entire band's prior recordings and did a pretty good job of it. And then he also wants to bring up, did Roth leave or was he fired? And then he said, did Hagar leave or was he fired? And then he also says, what the hell happened in 1996? And then he says, I think it speaks absolute volumes of Michael Anthony's graciousness and honor that he never once bitched and moaned about how he was treated. And he says he deserves way better than what he got from the brothers. I can't believe that Eddie's comments that Anthony used to video Eddie showing him the bass parts. Anthony as a live player is way too good for that. It doesn't ring true. And as to their legacy, he feels like there should have been some outtakes and remastering reissues. Okay, I want credit from Dave for really shortening that monstrous letter. I also want to tell you, listen, I am sorry, but the Roth and Hagar situation is not the same thing. Number one, Roth is the original singer. Number two, Hagar took the job as the replacement singer in Van Halen right after the band's massive popularity. So for him to come in and take over by skirting Van Halen's past catalog and insisting they use his manager is balls, number one. David Lee Roth coming back into the fold in 2007. Number one, David Lee Roth probably had a set agreement in terms when coming in, number one, to be playing his era songs. Number two, David Lee Roth can't sing Sammy's songs because he doesn't have the pipes to, and Gary didn't have any leverage. He was basically told to do whatever he was told to do. He was kind of a lapdog situation. Did Eddie Van Halen have a darker side? Absolutely. Alcohol and drugs will do that, but he certainly was an introvert for sure in regards to the situation. Roth left. But I think there was a misunderstanding. He thought he could kind of leave the door open and come back into the band, and I really believe that the band couldn't believe that he left. I think Dave was surprised the band moved on without him. I think there was a misunderstanding there. In terms of Hagar, I think he was pushed to quit. They badgered him until he jumped. for sure. 1986, yes, it was completely insane. Here's my guess. The band was pissed at Sam because of the whole Cabo Wobble deal and being lazy with working, for sure. Ray Daniels played up to this to get David Lee Roth back in to cash in on a reunion because he saw what Kiss was doing and was inspired by that with the amount of money they were making on tour. But then David Lee Roth comes back. He was not in great vocal shape. They had a rough time getting the 2 songs done for the best of. And then the MTV thing happened and everything goes to hell. In the meantime, Plan B is going on. They're working with Mitch. They're working with Gary. They're working with Mitch. They're working with Gary. Mitch pulls out. They go with Gary. And then the whole thing fell to pot, for sure. I think that Ed really wanted someone that he could control in terms of a lead singer. In terms of Michael Anthony, I think he's a perfectly capable bassist. Did Ed show him what he wanted for songs? I'm sure he did. I'm sure he showed him exactly what he wanted because he's the writer. However, Michael Anthony is perfectly capable to play, and I think he's kind of better off with Sam anyway. Dave, what do you think?
I do think that it's BS that the band does not do its entire catalog, no matter who was singing in the band.
You think Dave should have done Sammy songs?
No, I'm not. I understand that Dave could not sing Sam's stuff.
Right.
But you know what? It's like every time the band went out in the last few years, they would leave out half their catalog, which actually goes back to your argument that they're 2 bands.
Yeah,
and so,
totally.
Right? So that's always the challenge Van Halen had. What can I tell you? That's how they operated. So as for everything else, I think you summarized it very nicely, and I don't have much to add.
Okay. Letter number 20 comes from Scott Zulke from Waterford, Wisconsin. He says, just finished listening to January's podcast where you went over David Lee Roth's A Little Ain't Enough. During the discussion of the CD artwork, Taxman Dave, that's what he calls you, had made some comment about how surprised he was to see some photos on the inside that depicted people in blackface and referenced how there is no way that would happen today. Ironically, I'm currently reading Crazy from the Heat, Dave's autobiography. A day after I listened to your podcast, I came across a snippet from page 208 where Dave addressed it. I'm not going to read the whole snippet, but he talks about Al Jolson singing Swanee River and putting on blackface. The CD came out in 1991. The book came out in 1997. So what changed over the course of those 6 years? Perhaps the Rodney King incident, the LA riots in 1992. There was a heightened discussion about race relations in the months and years after that incident. Just thought the timing and the contrast was interesting to share. Well, I'll tell you this, Scott, I don't know, but the blackface is, it's weird, it's disrespectful, it's kind of creepy anyway. And Dave has always been supportive of African-American community. So I have to say that he definitely, by no stretch of the imagination, a racist, that's for sure. Dave's always been into black music, black culture, black arts. He's all supportive of that. However, I think he was going for a little bit of an artsy thing in there in that CD booklet. I know he was very inspired by Al Jolson growing up and stuff like that. It just seems weird looking back because, I think it's an artistic old-timey thing he was kind of going for. I don't think he was being disrespectful, but I don't think it would fly today. Dave, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. I don't think it was going out of his way to be disrespectful.
No.
I think it was an artistic statement. Didn't the writer of that letter also point out that there was some blackface in the Little Ain't Enough video?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's right. In the PS, he did put in there that PS, there's people with blackface in the Little Ain't Enough video beginning at 1 minute and 58 seconds. I forgot about that. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That video had got banned by MTV,
yep,
and I was just wondering, in retrospect, if that was one of the contributing factors. It was basically said because it was so racy, but
right.
I don't know how much more racy it was than anything else at the time.
That's true. That's true.
It just still surprises me that in 1991... that nobody had told Dave, Dave, we don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
it's
a little weird.
You may want to think about that twice.
Yeah, that's true. Even 91. I mean, even though it's a long time ago, 30 years, it's still back then.
I was going to say it's not so long ago that even then, people would raise their eyebrows.
That's true. That's true. Letter number 21 comes from same guy, Scott Zulke, Waterford, Wisconsin. He can't get enough. He says, a long-time listener, first-time what-iffer. Oh, boy. So he says, after listening to Distance and how incredible Wolf's singing voice appears to be, let's go back and assume that the Dave reunion still happens in 2007, but after the tour ends, Eddie, Alex bid Dave an adieu, and they are all treating fans to Van Halen Mach 4 with Wolf on bass and lead vocals. Think of a true rock album we could have been treated to over the past decade, maybe multiple albums, he said, with the three Van Halens working together, they could have been a much more efficient and on the same page. This would have been a new band performing all new material. They would not be going back and performing previous era Van Halen stuff on tour. What do you say? I think this is a missed opportunity. Well, Dave, I think we're going into what if territory here.
Now it's time for What If with Dave and Dave.
Shit, what if? What if?
Dave Marconi's favorite segment.
What if? What if, motherfucker?
I don't do what ifs.
Well, I think they could have done that. I mean, if you think about it, obviously Wolf could sing his ass off. So, I mean, if they were going to do that, I just don't think they could have called it Van Halen, even though they're all Van Halens in the band. It's just that Van Halen has already established its name with, Sam or Dave leading the helm there. Maybe they could have called it VH Trio, but you can't really ignore the whole Hagar Roth catalog. But I guess they would, walk away from that and start fresh. Maybe they could have done that. Obviously we'll never know. But I do think that this concept was discussed at one point, because you remember we backed up to that Mitch Lafon comment that maybe at some point this was going to happen. And it kind of fell through. Dave, what do you think?
It is one of the great what ifs. If Ed were still healthy, was this something they were going to do? Was this something that whoever was backing the touring of Van Halen said, all right, listen, if you guys do a stadium tour, we'll back Wolf's solo album tour.
Right.
So we'll fund that too. So you wonder if that kind of deal was in the works, which I wouldn't bet against that something like that was on the table.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's all, folks.
Letter number 22, Dave, and this is an unbelievably long letter, which I have spent a lot of time reducing. This is Darren McGuire from Connecticut, one of your neighbors over there. And he says, although if I need a nickname, let's go with DQ Magoo. Oh, my God. So he says here, greetings from another Villanova grad. By the way, I asked him, he's a 1998 grad, so he's a little younger than us. And he's also a Connecticut resident. And he says he loves the show, and he thinks we're doing an incredible job. I spent a fair amount of time on the road, so whenever your podcast hits my iPhone, I know I am covered for a plane or car entertainment for at least a day or two. He says, I can appreciate both eras of the band. However, I wondered about the business side when it came to Mikey. I'm still lacking some clarity or exactly on how or what Mike's ownership is in the band. And then he went over every single Van Halen album from Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, 3, 4, and how he was an equal partner in the 1984 that halfway through the 84 tour, Mikey's forced to give up his royalties. Does this predated to before 1984? He says, does this mean he also gave up any publishing rights, that he had anything between 78 and 83 catalog? And my hope is he's still getting his 25% royalty on the 78 to 83 catalog. And then he also said Sammy's supposed to have negotiated the band's entire deal with Warner Brothers and Ed Loeffler. But what did that mean for Mikey in terms of 5150, Oh Yeah When Too, the Fuck album, and Balance albums? Then he talked about the Ray Daniels situation, where he simply was a paid employee, or did he give some rights back, or what the story is there. Is it correct to assume that Mikey is simply a paid employee by Van Halen 3? Mike joins the tour as a hired hand in 2004 on the reunion tour, but for how much? The rumor is he also signed away all the remaining ownership in the band's name. Mikey is not struggling for cash, but I can see this as an issue for respect. He's a super nice guy who deserved better treatment. Thanks again for all your hard work, and I encourage everyone to donate to your Patreon site. Okay, great. Darren McGuire, DQ Magoo. Well, this is not 100% known, but I think that he has 25% up to that point in 1984, and then he got the decrease. I think in the Hagar years, Dave, didn't it say they were 30, 30, 30, and 10%? I think that was the case. And then he definitely went to higher gun status, and that might have been sort of Van Halen 3, 2004, that right around there, and it's sad, but he deserves better for sure. But what do you think?
I think he did all right at the end of the day. It's not always how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Yeah, that's the truth. And I think Mike kept.
And as far as I know, Mike never had an out-of-control drug problem.
No.
He never got divorced. from a money standpoint, I think he's doing all right.
According to CelebrityNetWorth.com, he's worth $55 million, so I think he's fine.
I think he's okay. And from a respect standpoint, I mean, a lot of stuff rolls off of Mike. So
yeah,
he's well respected in the music community to begin with. He's like the nicest guy in rock and roll.
Right,
so
right.
What more do you need than that?
That's true. And we are on to the last letter of night, David's favorite part. And we are at